TikTok bans in the House, Montana, and growing in numbers. Concerns about yet another social media network and how it can influence its users, as well as privacy concerns, have been at the forefront of discussions of TikTok since it came to the United States. This debate has heated up even more with the US House passing US HR 7521 this past month. This bill gives TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance, 6 months to sell all but 20% of the company to a US-based company or face a national ban. So why do politicians even want to ban TikTok? The biggest concern for people about TikTok is how the company is or could be using the data it collects on users for nefarious reasons. In its privacy policy, TikTok lists that it collects usage information, IP addresses, users' mobile carriers, users' device identifiers, keystroke patterns, location data, and more. And this algorithm and how it works and what's done with the data is a bit of a black box to everybody outside of ByteDance. Another factor here is that most people who are on TikTok also get most of their news and information from the app. If a technology is effectively in charge of what people are being served into their feed and watching, theoretically, that technology can influence a person and their opinions to a pretty big extent. Even further, there's no checks on what content could be AI generated, and there's no fact checks related to what people are sharing. This issue also came up in our most recent blog about combating AI deepfakes in elections, which we'll be covering next week. Another issue here is that a lot of people perceive TikTok to be a pretty powerful influence over our society. It's a pretty well-known fact that most people who are on TikTok are on TikTok. According to Wallaroo Media, the average TikTok user spends 95 minutes a day on the app. And when it comes to public opinion on this, for example, former Vice President Mike Pence wrote in an opinion article that TikTok is essentially digital fentanyl, a 21st century technological weapon. The app is so potent and addictive that TikTok is banned within China. So if the app is banned within the country where the parent company resides, there's got to be a little bit of something here, right? Here are some reasons why governments might consider banning TikTok. The first, national security concerns. Some governments believe that TikTok poses a pretty big threat to their national security because the app collects user data, and there's concerns about how that data can be accessed and exploited for foreign governments. Further in that is data privacy. So how is this user data being collected, shared, and potentially misused by the company? Then there's content issues. So is there inappropriate content or cultural concerns around the content? Is it appropriate for all young users, or does it match with the morals of a country? Then there's issues around misinformation. Like other social media platforms, TikTok can be a channel to spread false information or misinformation. There's political control. If you're an authoritarian government, you might seek to ban TikTok to maintain strict control over the content and information that your citizens can access. And then there's just competitive interest. In some cases, governments might just want to support a domestic alternative. So what's happening with TikTok in the US? The extent to which a ban could be implemented varies greatly on the legislation that's passed and at what level of government. Additionally, the legality and feasibility of banning such a widely used social media platform like TikTok can be really complex and contentious, involving international considerations, legal challenges, public opinion. A particular issue here is whether or not a ban on TikTok violates the First Amendment. What's even more interesting is that before this most recent bill, HR 7521, most of the movement towards banning TikTok was on the state level. And usually when we're looking at banning technology and applications and things like this, these decisions are made on the national, more sweeping level rather than by individual states. Mostly for the sake of simplicity of enforcing a ban because something called preemption. And the national attention towards TikTok really fell off quite a bit. Previously, the biggest news on the national stage was when the Trump administration banned TikTok unless it was acquired by an American company via an executive order signed by Trump in 2020. It never went into effect because it was challenged in court. But even more surprisingly, in this past month, Trump reversed his stance on the ban from being pro-ban and signing this executive order to instead saying to CNBC's, there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad with TikTok. But the thing I don't like is that without TikTok, you're going to make Facebook bigger. and I consider Facebook to be an enemy of the people, along with the media. Let's talk federal bills. Just this past month, the US House voted with overwhelmingly bipartisan support, 352 to 65, to pass this HR 7521. As we mentioned earlier, this bill will prohibit TikTok from the US App Store unless it is divested from its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, and acquired by a US company. It's not clear if the Senate's going to take up the bill and do a vote, and even if they do, the timeline on that, so this bill's still kind of up in the air. But looking a little bit further back, in January 2020, the US Army and Navy banned TikTok on government devices after the Defense Department labeled it as a security risk. There's also a decent amount of other US bills that limit TikTok in a few different ways. So there's No TikTok on United States Devices Act, which was signed by Joe Biden in 2022 that prohibits the use of TikTok on all federal government devices. Then there's the Terminate TikTok on Campuses Act of 2023, which has been in committee since 2023, but that seeks to prohibit federal funds from being provided to an institution of higher education unless the institution has banned TikTok on its electronic devices. Or there's the GOT Act, the Government Off TikTok Act, which aims to prohibit officers, employees, and elected officials of the federal government from having, establishing, or maintaining official TikTok accounts. Now let's look at the state bills. There's currently 80 bills related to banning TikTok around the country. In May of 2023, Montana became the first state to ban TikTok on all personal devices, though this was blocked by a judge in federal court before it could go into effect. The judge said that the law violates the Constitution in more ways than one and is a big overstep of state power. The state is still appealing the judge's ruling and still attempting to have this ban go into effect. Many states have also passed legislation that ban government employees from accessing and having TikTok on government devices. Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Texas, and Virginia all passed bans like this last year. Is TikTok doing anything about this? In this most recent legislative move from the House, TikTok took two different approaches to kind of galvanize the public into its favor. The first was an in-app message which allowed users to input their zip code and get their senator's phone number with a message that said, "Tell your senator how important TikTok is to you, ask them to vote no on the TikTok ban." The second approach was TikTok tapping into their high-powered users and influencers to create and share content about what they do on TikTok, like crochet, cook, dance, and a lot of these influencers traveled to the White House to speak out against the bill. What do you think will happen? Do you think it's unreasonable for the US government to ask TikTok be sold? Is this a step too far? Not far enough? How ethical is it that TikTok was showing this message to its users? Is this their right? Is it not their right? What do you think? Comment below.